Hi, my name is Chet from Avion Technology here in Chicago, the Chicagoland area. We are a web design development company based out of Arlington Heights here in Chicago. Uh, we are essentially into web development, app development, and our clients include a lot of agency partners, individuals, and people with ideas who want to go to market, and essentially startups. So today I'm going to talk about to give you a background about our company. Um, we follow a hybrid model where we have some folks here in the Arlington Heights area, mostly in project management and sales, and a lot of developers overseas. In terms of this gives us a big advantage in terms of costs, but because we can use offshore talent to make our bid very competitive. Uh, Now, one of the things that we hear a lot these days is individuals who've tried offshoring, who've tried outsourcing, and it has not worked for them. And we've been doing this for the last 17 years. So, and just FYI, we have about 50, all of our reviews on Google are 5-star reviews. We also have, an excellent rating on guru.com. We've been there for almost the last 16 years. So we kind of know how this works because we've been doing it for so long. So again, I wanted to take this opportunity today to share some of the experiences that we come across a lot, with people who've kind of burnt their fingers with outsourcing. So one of the things we see is a lot of people try their hand at outsourcing, it does not work, and or offshoring or using overseas developers, it does not work, and suddenly they swear that this does not work anymore, and they'll never offshore. So the way I look at it, US based developers, first of all, there's not so many developers here in the US, and unfortunately that is a reality. What that does is, because demand supply comes into play, so the prices for a developer are really high in the US, $100, $150 an hour. Now, some people can afford it, many people can't. The ones who can afford it use local developers. The one who cannot afford using someone who charges $100, $150 an hour has to unfortunately go somewhere where they can, get affordable prices. Now, whether that is right ethically or not, I don't know. I'm not a judge, and I'm not here to judge anyone else. But what I do know is that because of offshoring, a lot of projects that would have never seen the light of the day, that would have never, otherwise come into existence, those projects can come into existence because you have developers who work at a lesser cost. So for a lot of mom and pop shops, for a lot of startups who are bootstrapping their way, offshoring becomes a really good option, especially when they're low on funds, to kind of make sure that their idea comes into fruition, that their idea manifests. But that being said, there are a few pitfalls in the whole outsourcing process. Here at Avion, we've kind of built a specialization around taking on projects which have been bombed by offshore companies. So we kind of know what works and what does not work. So today I'm going to share with you a couple of outsourcing pitfalls, really. The first thing that you got to see when you're outsourcing a project or offshoring a project is don't go with the person who's bidding the lowest. I've spoken to a lot of clients who saw an attractive bid. It was a tenth of what they had budgeted for or half of what they had budgeted for, and they gave that individual the project without seeing their credentials, and the project was a failure. That freelancer took their money and ran away. This is a very typical scenario. So the guy who's bidding the lowest might not necessarily be the best person for you. It's every person has their own cost structure, right? Someone who's a freelancer has a very different cost structure from a company that's invested in infrastructure and security and technology. So when reviewing the bids, don't go for the one who has the lowest bid, right? Number two is insist on a scope of work document, insist on a mock-up, insist on wireframes, right? Because the more you can crystallize, the more you can solidify your project before you start the project, the better it is in terms of the end outcome. A lot of times the project requirements are not crystallized, the project requirements are not solidified, and that kind of leads to disappointments later downstream when the project kind of goes haywire. So that's the second thing that I would ask you to look at, is have a very detailed scope of work document. If possible, build out the wireframes of your app, or build out all the different screens of your app, build out all the different pages of your site. What that's going to do is it's going to give your developer a better chance at reviewing it and coding it much better. The third thing I would say is that look at a website like guru.com or upwork.com. They have an escrow system. What an escrow system does is, you put the money in the escrow, but you release that payment only after the milestones have been completed. So see if you can work with one of these websites, or even if you're not working through one of these websites, use some kind of an escrow system and a milestone-based system. There are two situations which I always find very suspect. One is when developers ask for all the money up front. I think that's a bad practice, and anyone who asks you for all the money up front should immediately, that's a red flag straight away. Right? You should never pay all the money up front. But at the same time, don't expect to, don't say that you'll pay all the money at the end of the project, because at the end of the day, the developer is a human being. He probably has a family. He has to put food on the table. And the moment you say that I'm going to pay for all this at the end of the project, his interest level in the project has tanked at that point, right? So what I have seen usually get the best outcome, or get the best results, is have a milestone-based system where you're paying the developer upon successful completion of all the different milestones. That is something that I've seen work really well. And again, if you have a really good scope of work document, and if the requirements and the wireframes and the markups have been created before you start the project, again, that kind of leads to a better outcome and project success. The third thing is a bad experience. Now, we've often been to a bad restaurant, right? We've been to a bad Chinese restaurant, for example, where the food was bad, the service was bad, and you hated it. But that doesn't mean that you stop going to Chinese restaurants all your life, because that was just a bad experience, right? So within the whole outsourcing space, unfortunately, there's good companies and there's bad companies. There's good individuals and there's bad individuals, right? Just because you had 1, 2, or 3 bad experiences with outsourcing should not mean that you should swear outsourcing for life. You should do what I call smart sourcing, which is look for good individuals wherever they might be in the world. So for example, you might find a really good UI UX person out of Poland, and you might find a really good WordPress website developer out of India, and you might have a really good content person out of Seattle, and so you have all these different people, and they're all located in different parts of the world. So what you're doing is you're smart sourcing, right? You're not saying that I'm going to do my project in the US only, because God forbid if you don't find a good UI UX person or someone who's not working at your rates, your project is never going to take off. At the same time, you're not saying that I'm going to do all my work in India, because I've seen a lot of times, Indian companies do not have the best content writers. So instead of swearing off outsourcing because you've had one bad experience, instead look at smart sourcing. And that actually gets me to my next point, which is how do you vet a vendor, right? Let's say you want to get a knee, your knees are bad, so you want to go get a knee surgery done. You're not going to go to the lowest bidder, right? You're also not going to type in knee surgery in Google and then go to the first person that pops up in the search results. You're actually going to go through your network, your friends, your family, your colleagues at work, and ask them, do you know anyone, do you know a good orthopedic surgeon who's a knee specialist? and then some names will pop up, and then you will do some more research on those names, and eventually you'll come to someone. Or you might go to your primary care provider, and your primary care provider might recommend you to someone else. In all of these situations, you're using someone's reference, right? Someone is referring you to the specialist. So why not do that for your website project as well? Use your friends and family, use your colleagues, use someone that someone else has used before. Or go to a website like Yelp, see their reviews, see their Google reviews. Don't go for someone who's bidding the lowest, and don't go for someone whose name comes up first in the search results. Go for someone who has been verified by Google. He or she has good Google reviews, he or she has good Yelp reviews. Someone whose name has been suggested within your network. The next is have SLAs. So when you do sign the contract, and when you have your terms and everything written down in the contract, make sure that that contract has an SLA with an escalation matrix, because you want to see all the bells that you can ring in that chain, so that if necessary you can also ring the doorbell of the CEO to make sure that your project is successful, right? A lot of times the first sure shot sign of a company being a fly-by-nighter is if their agreement does not have an SLA, an escalation matrix, right? So for example, here at Avion, we have team leads. On top of the team leads are the delivery heads. On top of the delivery heads are the customer service executives based out of US. On top of the customer service executives, you have your delivery managers, and the delivery managers report to the CEO. So you have an escalation matrix. So if things are not working out at the team lead level, you can always escalate it up to the CEO. And when it reaches the CEO's desk, he has to resolve that issue. So make sure that your agreement has some kind of an SLA in it. The next point is, and this is something that I have experienced in a lot of projects, and let me kind of make this as clear as possible. IT projects, web design projects, by their very nature, are messy, right? Someone once told me that a web dev project is like having a baby. It's fun to conceive, but it's painful to deliver, and that's exactly how they are. They are messy, especially in the second or third milestones. When the website is under development, things look broken. You click on something, it does not work. You open up a link, it does not do what it's supposed to do. You can't sign up. That's because it's like a house. It's a work in progress, right? If you go to a house which is under construction, it looks dirty, right? There's rubble everywhere. Things are not things are just strewn around. You have like electricity cables, and the roof is not done. So it looks like it's a work in progress. So website or any dev project, when it's on a staging server, also looks like it's a work in progress. To insist that that work in progress should look clean is I think that's unreasonable. Website projects are always messy, and usually in the fourth milestone, or in the final milestone after everything has been migrated over to your server. That's typically when everything will start to get to come around, when the T's get crossed and the I's get dotted. So please don't insist in the earlier milestones that everything should be bug free, everything should work flawlessly, because that's an unreasonable expectation. Another unreasonable expectation, and this is something that might put your project into development, into what I call the chronic development loop, is insisting on perfection, right? Now, if your website or your project doesn't do any of its core functionalities, or doing what it is supposed to do, you should take your developer to task for that. No questions about it. Your developer has to deliver that. But sometimes we insist on perfection, and while perfection, sometimes is a good thing, otherwise, in this industry, perfection is often suicidal, because it'll ensure that your product is under development forever, right? Browsers change, browsers get updated. There's new devices in the market all the time. If you're connecting to an API, APIs change, servers change. So a website or an app project has so many variables in it. And to insist that everything should work just perfectly all the time, sometimes that becomes an unreasonable expectation. Now, the best way to kind of avoid that situation is to have what I call a core, and you should not negotiate, you should not compromise about the core functionality. But the peripherals, things which are not a part of the core, those you can negotiate. And like I always say, have a maintenance contract, because things will go down, things will break, things will not work as they should, and it's unreasonable to expect a developer to kind of pick up the tab for that. So have a maintenance contract, so that if something does happen, the developer can go in and take care of it. Another really good thing that I've seen is Trello. So insist on some kind of a change management protocol for your project. Change management is the number one reason why most vendors will drop the ball on a project. Because especially in today's day and age, most IT projects, most web dev projects are becoming, there's a trend towards more and more fixed fee projects. And in a fixed fee projects, to make sure that their profitability margins are not hurt, developers, vendors will insist on a change management protocol. They will insist on a very tight change management protocol. And if the developer sees that there's a lot of changes, there's a lot of scope creep, at some point the project just becomes loss making for them. It just becomes economically unviable for them, and they will just drop the ball. So to make sure a developer does not lose interest in the project, insist on some kind of a change management protocol. I have seen Trello to be the best and easiest to use change management system. You do those buckets in Trello, and that ensures that you don't need any expensive tools if you're using Trello. Which brings me to my two last points. One is don't shoot the messenger. In a lot of outsourcing projects, the guy at the other end, English might not be his first language. And be cognizant of the fact that English is not his or her first language. And a lot of times, if they're trying to communicate something to you, be a little empathetic that it's not always the developer's fault. Like I said, a website or an app has so many different components associated with it that it's, if something breaks down or if something does not work as it should, go to your developer and tell him that this is not working. He might charge you a little bit, and that's fine, or he might not charge you if it's within the maintenance period. But in either situations, don't shoot the messenger by being abusive, by shouting at him, by verbally bullying him in any way, because we are in a service-oriented industry, and there's humans on the other side. And the number one way to kind of piss off a person is if you shout at them. And the next thing is be reasonable, and that's the last point. Most of, at Avion, we've delivered 1,000+ successful projects now over the last 13-14 years. And that's happened because there were reasonable people on both sides of the table. A fact of outsourcing is that it's a cross-cultural exercise. The cultures, especially Eastern cultures, are very indirect. They're very structure-oriented, right? Whereas Western cultures are very direct. In the East, no one likes to give bad news. The East, there's a lot of hierarchy. In the East, there's a lot of indirect conversation. There's a lot of politeness. In the West, things are more direct. If there's bad news, you deliver it first. A lot of times, an American talking frankly is looked at in the East as someone who's talking rudely. That's not the case. An American feels that he has the best chances at success if he's as frank as possible. Whereas in the East, a lot of times frank conversation is looked at as a sign of rudeness. So you have these little cultural issues, and they are very integral to this whole offshoring thing. So the one way in which you can kind of cross these cross-cultural issues is really by being reasonable, being empathetic to the person on the other side. For example, our developers are in India, and Diwali is the biggest function. Diwali is the biggest, festival in India. So to expect the development team to stay late at night during Diwali to finish a project is, that's insane. That's like expecting someone here to stay at Christmas. So you have these little cultural things that you just need to be very cognizant about. I think outsourcing works for some people, outsourcing does not work for some people. If you have a really tight budget, if you have a technology where you're not finding any local talent, these are the circumstances when outsourcing really works, and I think you should give it a try. But outsourcing is not about, or offshoring is not about taking a project, flinging it, 13,000 miles across, and expecting it to come back as a success. There's a lot of little things that you need to do in order to make sure that your outsourcing project or offshoring project is a success. Like I said, look for vendors who are qualified, look for vendors with a good review, look for vendors within your network who come to you via good word of mouth. When you do talk to a vendor, make sure that you're very clear about your scope of work and there's no ambiguity in terms of what you want. Make sure that you have fair payment terms so that it's a win-win for both of you. During the project, make sure that there's good communication with each other by using project management tools like Trello. And at the end of the day, just be reasonable, just be nice. I'm sure that if you follow these steps, your next offshoring project will be a huge success. Here at Avion, we develop apps, we develop websites at a fraction of the cost of our competitors, and we use offshoring to make that happen. We've been doing it for the last 15 years and have successfully delivered more than 1,000 projects this way. If you have a project that you want to discuss, give us a shout. These are our coordinates. Love to discuss your next project. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye.